over spring break, which was late March for me, I went on a trip called the Sojourn Project trip. You can see my butterflies and also the background. For any of you who can tell, those are faces that make up the butterfly. Sojourn Project is a school mostly centered project led by a former teacher named Mr. Steinberg. He takes other people other than students, but it's a lot of the time it's students, and there are multiple different trips that follow different parts of African American history. My 8th grade year, I went on a trip to the DC area and followed the Civil War and the story of slavery, visiting George Washington's house and other such places. And then this trip follows the civil rights movement of the 60s. Here is our trip. And my sermon today is part of a college credit course. I also just genuinely wanted to share, but it's part of a college course where I share something about this trip. So what it will mainly be is little moments that had really big impacts for me, and I will try to make it spiritual, message giving in some way. And yeah, so our trip started in Atlanta. We went to Stone Mountain of Georgia, the King Center, where both Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King Jr. are buried. And then we went to Montgomery, Alabama, where we visited the Civil Rights Memorial and the Legacy Museum. Birmingham, it's not listed on my slide, but we visited the 16th Street Baptist Church, where 4 little girls were killed in a bombing, and Kelly Ingram Park, which is where the Birmingham Children's March took place, and children were hosed and dogs were let out on them. And then Selma, we crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And then Memphis, we visited the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Motel, where King was assassinated. And then we ended in Little Rock, Arkansas at Central High School, where the Little Rock Nine attended. So the way this is going to go is I'm just going to have visuals of things that we visited, and I'll tell a short little story if I have one of each place, and things are labeled and everything. So at the end, if you want to ask any questions about anything, feel free to do that, and I will go back and talk about them. There will be people on each slide. There's no way for me to get to every single person we met and every single person we learned about. So I've got their names up on a screen, and I have a bunch of books and songs and quotes and people that I can list and send to Peter or Polly to send out if anyone wants those book recommendations or anything. So this was Atlanta. We went to Stone Mountain of Georgia, and that's where I had my first little moment. We weren't told we were going to go here. He just brought us here. And for those of you who don't know, this is the birthplace of the Ku Klux Klan. And those 3 men carved into this beautiful stone mountain are Confederate leaders. I'm not sure who is who. I know Robert E. Lee is up there. I didn't take the time to memorize their names. We were brought here and we were told to share just one word. And I think a lot of people said they were really disgusted because as we came here, we walked through an amusement park to get here. This is where families take their children to have a picnic. I'm not sure if you can see at the bottom photo, there's people there just having a family picnic, and those children, I don't know if they'll ever know the history behind that carving. And it just was really hard to see. And then, yeah. So this was Montgomery. We visited the Civil Rights Memorial, which is this over here. We went around in a group, in a circle, and touched every single name that was carved into that circle. We touched the wall. We were told to write letters to ourselves. And this was one of the places where we wrote part of that letter. And I could only talk about how much I admired the other kids who kept their hands on the freezing cold water, resting against that wall over there that says, "Until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." Because I don't exactly know how to explain it, but this specific day in Montgomery, I lost myself. Not physically lost, like emotionally, spiritually. It was like everything that had been a part of me just went away after all the things I had seen that day, which I'll continue to get to. Yeah, so there was cold water that we put our hands in, and I remember Mr. Steinberg telling us about this one kid who had to stop because her fingers were getting so cold from the water, and then she realized that pain is only a small portion of what people must have experienced back then. And so she went back and she kept her hands in the water. And then earlier in the day, we had visited the Legacy Museum, and this is where I really had a hard time. The Legacy Museum, I recommend it to anyone who can make it to Montgomery ever in their life, because it's something that everyone needs to see. And I've got photos here, but it's not the same. I walked in and 5 minutes in, my knees were shaking. I could not keep walking. I had to sit down because it was just, it was so hard to see. Just some photos. This is the seafloor. I don't know if you can tell, but those necks are chained. And you just walk through this seafloor lake area. And then there's a timeline and signs. And this is where it really hit me. These are jars of soil collected from places where people were lynched. And this is an ongoing project. Families who look into their family history and know that one of their family members was lynched can visit the place and gets a jar from this museum and fills it with dirt. One of the schools that came on the trip with us, it was a multi-school thing, was from Ohio, and there was a town close to theirs that there was someone who got lynched there, and so they filled the jar. And then we ended here writing our first part of our letter to ourselves, and this is a bunch of faces of people who may never get mentioned in a history textbook, but made a massive impact on the movement from the 1600s to now. There's blank spaces on the wall where people are still being added. I don't know if I can point out any faces. I believe that's Aretha Franklin over there, for those of you who know her. And then this was Birmingham. This was where 4 little children were killed in a bombing. And something I remember about this was there's a window of Jesus, and the only part of the window that was blown out during the bombing was Jesus's face. And yeah, it's been replaced now, but being in that church, listening to the sisters of girls who were killed, it was hard to listen to. But what was really hard was coming to Kelly Ingram Park, which is where children were hosed, dogs attacked them. And I remember this was everyone's favorite lesson, because it's, being a teenager, it's like, wow, we have the power to do this. We have the power to get a bunch of people together, march for something that we believe in. And that's still happening today, which is really cool to see. But this was the first time I was really kind of alone and able to walk in nature, and it was meditative, and it gave me a lot of time to reflect. And it was just a really cool experience. Another place that I highly suggest going to. Selma, I didn't have a huge moment here, at least not that I can share as far as I know. We crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Each step we learned different things about each place, and then we met people. So, and then this is where I really, really broke down, at the Lorraine Motel. It's a museum now. And this is where MLK was assassinated. You go through the whole museum. It's a really cool museum. And then you end getting to look into King's room, getting to see the balcony where he lay. And that block of cement right there is where there was too much blood to clean up. They just had to replace it. And as I was walking through, there was a long line, so I skipped ahead and kind of went backwards through the exhibit. And the first thing I read was MLK's father, who was quoted remembering all these things about his son. And then the quote that struck me was, "All that was gone." And I broke down because I missed my parents. I missed my family. I wanted to make sure that everyone was okay. And I just realized how much I was taking for granted every step of the way. And it was really hard to see this room because I looked up and I saw just a human being whose life was taken, because there's coffee, there's an unmade bed, there's cigarettes. He wasn't, I mean, he was a fabulous leader, but he was also just a man who had children, who had parents. And I looked at that square where the blood was, and I broke. And that was hard to talk about later, because we did have to talk about it. But that was the moment that I really wanted to talk about, because that was when I really felt something spiritual. It was actually like I felt him there. And that was my call to action. I'm not the biggest activist. I want to be, but I just don't know if I have it in me. But I know that there are little things that I can do every single day, like telling this story, that are part of activism. Activism is educating people. Activism is speaking out, doing something to speak out. And so this trip has made me an activist. That's the story. And then we ended in Little Rock 9, with the Little Rock 9. We met both Minnie Jean Brown and Elizabeth Eckford, two of the Little Rock 9. And their story was hard to hear too. I highly encourage you listen to their stories if you ever get the chance. I will do talk back now if anyone wants to hear any stories about individual things that struck them in the sermon.